The village lay in the shadow of the mountains, tucked into a narrow valley where the river bent like a silver ribbon around the fields. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimneys, carrying the smell of burning wood and fresh bread, masking the unease that had settled over the townspeople. Children laughed and ran through the streets, their games oblivious to the danger that loomed above, and the elders muttered prayers under their breath, glancing nervously at the horizon. No one had seen a dragon in 100 years, not since the old stories were whispered in hushed tones by the fireside. They said the beasts were gone, extinct, or perhaps resting deep within hidden caves. But Lyra knew better. The signs had been there for weeks: scorched trees on the outskirts of the forest, strange claw marks carved into stone, and the unsettling rumble that sometimes shook the earth when no storm was near. Tonight, she felt it in her bones, the warning that fire was coming. Lyra crouched on the ridge overlooking the village, the sharp leather of her boots pressing into the dirt. Her brown hair, tied back in a practical ponytail, whipped around her face in the cold evening wind. She tightened her grip on the spear her father had given her years ago, a weapon forged from meteorite iron, said to pierce even the toughest dragon's scales. The metal felt heavy in her hands, grounding her in the face of the terror she knew was approaching. The villagers below went about their evening routines, unaware of the shadow that moved above them. Lanterns flickered as families prepared for dinner, unaware that tonight might be their last. Lyra's eyes scanned the sky, searching for the first sign. A rustle in the treetops, a flicker of wings, anything that would confirm her fears. A sudden rumble shook the earth beneath her. She froze, ears straining. It came again, louder this time, vibrating through the stone ridge. Birds erupted into the sky in a frantic cloud of wings, scattering in all directions. Lyra's pulse quickened. The sound was familiar. It was the heartbeat of the mountains themselves, or perhaps the pulse of something far larger, far older, far deadlier. She remembered her father's stories, told late at night by the fire. He had been a hunter, one of the last to face dragons in the days when they were not myths. He spoke of their cunning, their fury, their intelligence, and the devastation they could unleash with a single swipe of their claws or a breath of fire. Lyra had grown up hearing these tales as warnings and lessons. And now, for the first time in her life, she understood their urgency. From the ridge, she could see the first hint of smoke rising in the distance, curling above the forest like a sinister finger. It wasn't like the smoke from chimneys. This was thicker, blacker, with a sulphurous edge that made her throat tighten. The wind shifted, carrying the acrid scent toward her. Her stomach churned. This was no storm. This was fire, and it was moving fast. Lyra slid down the ridge, careful to keep her movement quiet. She didn't want to alert the villagers, or whatever was coming. Her boots sank slightly into the soft earth as she reached the edge of the forest, where the trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches scratching at the sky. She pressed herself against the trunk of a gnarled oak, peering through the darkness. The shadows here were deeper, denser, almost alive. A shadow moved across the mountainside, immense and sinuous. Wings. She saw the glint of scales catching the last light of the setting sun. Her breath caught in her throat. It was bigger than she had imagined, bigger than any story had ever described. The dragon was real, and it was coming. Panic threatened to rise, but she forced it down. She had a role to play. She had to warn the villagers. She had to prepare. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to hide, to survive, but this was her home. And she could not leave it to fate alone. She moved quickly but silently toward the village, heart pounding in rhythm with the distant rumble. Every step brought the roar closer, every shadow seemed to twitch with unseen movement. She passed the outer fields, the wheat swaying in the wind like golden waves, and the river, its surface reflecting the fiery glow from afar. The village gates were still open, still innocent in their ignorance. She reached the first houses and knocked urgently on the doors, shouting warnings she wasn't sure anyone would believe. Faces appeared in the windows, confusion and fear mixing in equal measure. Some villagers laughed nervously, thinking her imagination had run wild. But others, those who had felt the tremor, smelled the acrid smoke, or remembered the old stories, looked at her with wide eyes and unspoken understanding. Lyra took a deep breath, her grip tightening on the spear. The night was about to change forever. Somewhere above, the dragon circled, waiting, watching, and preparing to strike. She felt the weight of every life in the village pressing down on her shoulders, but there was no time for hesitation. Courage, she realized, wasn't the absence of fear, it was standing tall when fear threatened to consume everything. And tonight, courage would be tested. The first screams tore through the night before the fire even reached the village. Lyra's heart raced as she darted between the cottages, trying to reach anyone who might listen, who might flee before it was too late. Lanterns swung in the wind, casting long, quivering shadows across the cobblestones, but the darkness above was deeper, oppressive, alive. Then she saw it, Kael'thas. The dragon's wings spanned the sky like storm clouds, blotting out the stars, the moon, even the dim glow of the village lights. Scales the color of molten bronze shimmered in the glow of the distant fires, and each beat of those massive wings sent a gust strong enough to topple carts and tear roofs from their foundations. Lyra froze in awe and terror. This was not a creature to be fought lightly. This was a force of nature given form, a nightmare sculpted from fire and rage. Kael'thas descended slowly at first, circling the village like a hawk before striking. Its head lowered, and a torrent of fire erupted from its jaws, roaring across the rooftops. Lyra dived behind a wall as the flames surged past, scorching the wooden beams of her neighbor's home. The heat was blistering, her hair singed, but she pushed herself up, driven by adrenaline and the stubborn refusal to flee without fighting. People scattered in every direction, some screaming in panic, some frozen in disbelief. Lyra noticed the blackened footprints in the dirt, scales that had pressed into the earth as the dragon landed, and knew there was no room for mistakes. Every second counted. Every breath could be your last. She spotted a family huddled near the fountain. A mother clutched her child while the father tried to grab a small cart to barricade their door. Lyra sprinted over, grabbing the man's arm. "Get inside. Now," she shouted. The man hesitated, doubt flickering across his face, but the roar of Kael'thas overhead left no room for hesitation. They ran together toward the sturdier stone houses near the center of the village. Kael'thas' tail lashed the ground, sending debris flying like missiles. A roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, narrowly missing a group of villagers. Lyra ducked instinctively, her heart hammering. The dragon's eyes glowed like molten gold, and it seemed almost intelligent, tracking the humans with purpose. Each movement, each calculated strike reminded her of her father's words: "They are cunning. They know fear. They exploit it." She gritted her teeth and raised her spear. The weight of it felt comforting in her hands, a tangible connection to her father, to the legends, to the hope that humanity could endure. Kael'thas spotted her almost immediately. The dragon's head tilted, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Then, with a deafening roar that shook the valley, it lunged. Lyra ran, weaving between toppled carts and shattered barrels. The ground beneath her feet trembled as Kael'thas landed in the village square, its claws gouging deep scars into the cobblestones. Flames shot from its maw, sweeping toward her path. She rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding incineration, and planted her spear into the dirt, bracing herself. The fire licked her heels, the heat unbearable, but she stayed rooted. This was the moment to strike, or to die trying. Kael'thas reared back, preparing another burst of flame. Lyra ducked low, timing her movement with the rise and fall of the dragon's massive body. Her mind raced, analyzing patterns, seeking weaknesses. Then she saw it, the slight twitch in its left foreleg, the way its eyes narrowed when focusing on a target. There was a rhythm to the chaos, a logic buried beneath the fury. She dashed forward, dodging a sweep of the tail, and jabbed her spear toward the base of the dragon's wing, aiming for the joint. Metal clanged against scale, sparks flying, and Kael'thas bellowed in pain, retracting just enough to throw her off balance. Lyra stumbled, skidding across the stone, her hands blistered from gripping the spear so tightly. But she rose again, determined. Each strike, each dodge, was a message: she would not yield. The villagers, watching from behind shattered walls and barricades, began to rally. Inspired by her defiance, they picked up whatever they could as weapons: axes, pitchforks, stones. The dragon was powerful, yes, but Lyra's courage was contagious. Humanity might be small and fragile in the shadow of such a beast, but it was clever, resourceful, and relentless. Kael'thas roared, whipping its head back and forth. Flames tore across the village, setting thatched roofs ablaze. Lyra ducked behind a fountain as debris rained around her. Her hands were scorched, her arms aching, but her gaze never wavered from the dragon. She knew this was only the beginning. This was the first strike, a test of will, strength, and courage. And she would meet it head-on. Even as Kael'thas circled back, preparing another assault, Lyra planted her feet firmly, raising her spear like a banner of defiance. Tonight, fear would meet resistance. Tonight, humanity's heart would stand against flames. The air was thick with smoke and ash, clinging to Lyra's throat and stinging her eyes. Flames licked the edges of the village, devouring wooden huts and barns with insatiable hunger. The scent of burning timber was overwhelming, but Lyra forced herself to focus. She had survived Kael'thar's first strike, but now came the true test. She needed a weapon capable of piercing the dragon's scales. Her father's spear felt alive in her hands, a weight of history and hope. Forged from meteorite iron, it was said to be the only thing strong enough to pierce a dragon's hide. 4 years, it had hung over the hearth, a relic and a warning. Tonight, it would either save her life, or mark her death. Kael'thar circled above the village, wings slicing through the smoke like blades. Its roar reverberated through the mountains, shaking loose stones from the ridges above. Lyra crouched behind a partially collapsed wall, surveying the battlefield. Villagers were scattered, some hiding, some fleeing, their screams lost beneath the dragon's thunderous presence. She couldn't save them all, but she could create an opening. She had to. A sudden gust of wind carried a spark of insight. Kael'thar's strikes were precise, but they followed a pattern. Its tail swept in predictable arcs after each fire burst. Its wings retracted slightly when preparing for another swoop. Every motion had a rhythm, and if she timed herself right, she could exploit it. She gritted her teeth and bolted from cover, sprinting across the shattered cobblestones. Sparks hissed against the metal of her spear as the dragon breathed fire over her path, scorching the ground just inches from her heels. She ducked under a beam that collapsed from a burning roof, rolling to avoid the falling debris. The chaos was deafening, but Lyra's mind was razor-sharp. This was not merely survival, it was strategy. Kael'thar landed in the village square with a ground-shaking crash. The impact sent stones skittering in every direction. The dragon's eyes, molten gold and unblinking, locked on her. Lyra felt a chill, realizing it wasn't just attacking instinctively, it was calculating, hunting. She lunged forward as Kael'thar lifted a claw to strike. The spear jabbed at the dragon's foreleg, grazing the scales with a screech of metal on metal. Sparks flew, and Kael'thar recoiled, letting out a deafening roar that rattled her teeth. It wasn't enough, the scales held, but it was a start. She needed to aim higher, strike where the armor thinned. Her mind raced. The wing joints, the only exposed areas she could see, were vulnerable. If she could drive the spear there, she might incapacitate it long enough to strike deeper. Kael'thar roared again, taking to the air with a flap that sent a wall of wind and smoke rolling through the square. Lyra rolled behind a toppled cart, spearing a chunk of debris into the path of the dragon's landing to slow it. It worked. Kael'thar stumbled slightly, claws scraping the cobblestones. That was her chance. She sprinted, heart hammering in her chest, adrenaline sharpening every sense. Flames scorched the edges of her vision, but she focused solely on the dragon's left wing. Timing her run with the beat of Kael'thar's wings, she leaped onto a stone pedestal near the fountain, propelling herself upward, spear raised high. The dragon spotted her mid-air, jaws snapping, but she was already in motion. She landed lightly on the pedestal, the spear's tip aimed at the base of the wing. Kael'thar lashed its tail, narrowly missing her as she drove the meteorite spear into the joint. Sparks erupted, a metallic screech echoing across the square. The dragon shrieked, wings thrashing wildly, and for the first time, Lyra felt the scales give way. She yanked the spear back, then stabbed again with precision, each strike met with resistance but yielding small victories. The villagers watching from behind broken walls cheered quietly, their fear mixed with hope. Lyra's defiance was contagious, igniting a spark in their hearts that the dragon could not extinguish. Kael'thar reared back, flames curling from its jaws in fury, trying to dislodge the spear. Lyra's arms burned, but she held firm. Every second was a battle of endurance. Sweat and ash coated her skin, but she didn't falter. The spear was more than metal, it was the culmination of generations of knowledge, skill, and courage. It was her link to humanity's resilience. Then came the moment of opportunity. Kael'thar's wing trembled with each beat, weakening under the relentless strikes. Lyra seized the opening, leaping higher than she thought possible, and drove the spear deep into the dragon's shoulder joint. Kael'thar roared, a sound that split the night and shook the mountains, but it faltered, wings folding partially. It struggled to regain balance, crashing into a nearby building and sending debris flying in all directions. Lyra landed lightly, heart racing, eyes locked on the dragon. She could feel the strain in her arms, the blisters forming on her palms, but she didn't retreat. She had given Kael'thar its first real wound. For the first time, the dragon hesitated. Above her, the firelit sky glowed with the chaos of destruction. Villagers began to regroup, armed now with axes and pitchforks, emboldened by her courage. One human, one spear, had stood against a monster thought unstoppable, and for the first time, there was a glimpse of hope. Kael'thar thrashed, fury and pain mixing into a roar that echoed off the mountains. Lyra tightened her grip on the spear, breathing hard. She knew this was only the beginning. The battle had shifted, but the war was far from over. Her mind raced with strategy, every movement calculated, every heartbeat synchronized with the beast. The dragon had underestimated humanity's resolve. And Lyra, armed with courage, skill, and the spear of hope, was ready to prove that even the greatest fire could be met with the strength of one determined heart. Smoke choked the streets, curling around toppled carts and smoldering rooftops. The scent of scorched wood and molten metal filled Lyra's lungs, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. Each inhale and exhale became a mantra, grounding her amidst the chaos. Kael'thas thrashed in the village square, wings faltering after her relentless assault with the meteorite spear. Sparks flew from every strike, and the dragon roared in a mixture of pain and fury that reverberated through the valley. But Lyra knew one thing above all: raw strength was not enough. She had to outthink the dragon. She ducked behind the shattered remnants of a stone wall, analyzing the monster before her. Kael'thas' wings were partially folded, but the forelimb still struck the ground with crushing force. Its eyes glimmered with intelligence, cunning enough to anticipate attacks. Lyra's father had told her that dragons were not mindless beasts. They were predators who learned, adapted, and struck where their prey was weakest. Her heart pounded, but her mind sharpened. The battle was no longer merely survival, it was strategy. Every movement of the dragon was a clue. Its tail swept after each fiery breath, a predictable arc. Its claws scraped the cobblestones when landing or taking off, leaving deep furrows. Lyra noticed how Kael'thas tilted its head slightly when focusing on her, calculating trajectory, distance, and threat. This was her advantage. She just had to remain 2 steps ahead. She darted from cover to cover, moving closer to the village edge where the terrain narrowed. There, she could use the canyon walls as a natural trap. Kael'thas' massive wingspan would be restricted, and she could exploit its reduced mobility. Each step was deliberate. She dodged falling beams and smoldering debris, listening to the dragon's roars and breathing patterns. The creature was tired, but dangerous, and one misstep could cost her life. Kael'thas lunged, jaws snapping where she had stood moments before. Lyra rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the fire that burst from its mouth. The heat singed her arms, and she could feel the sting on her cheeks. But she forced herself to focus, calculating timing and angles. The meteorite spear glinted in her hand, a weapon and symbol of hope. The dragon landed near the canyon's mouth, the ground trembling under its weight. Lyra gritted her teeth. She had to force it in. Using rocks and debris, she baited Kael'thas toward the narrowing passage, her movements agile, precise, almost like a dance. The dragon, enraged and in pain, followed, its fury blinding it to the trap forming. Kael'thas roared, swinging its tail in a wide arc. Lyra ducked behind a stone pillar, feeling the wind of its strike brush against her face. Sparks flew from her spear as it scraped the dragon's scales in a calculated jolt, enough to distract, not enough to fully wound. Kael'thas thrashed, struggling for freedom, but Lyra had anticipated each movement, each beat of its wings, each sweep of its tail. Every action had a reaction she had predicted. She sprinted toward the canyon's narrow mouth, leading the dragon with a combination of taunts and precise movements. Kael'thas, blinded by rage and pain, lunged after her. Its wings clipped the canyon walls, scraping stone and sending debris flying. Lyra ducked, rolled, and jabbed the spear into a weakened joint near the base of the wing. Sparks erupted, and the dragon's roar echoed like thunder, shaking the very earth. For a moment, Kael'thas hesitated, staggering in the confined space. Its wings were pinned partially against the canyon walls, reducing its mobility dramatically. Lyra's breath came in ragged gasps, but she pressed forward. Every strike, every movement, exploited the dragon's diminished freedom. The villagers watched from a safe distance, whispering prayers, their hope rekindled by Lyra's daring. Kael'thas' intelligence became evident again. It wasn't giving up, it was adapting, circling back, attempting to use its head and tail to regain advantage. But Lyra anticipated these maneuvers, predicting angles, swings, and counterattacks. Each time, she dodged and struck with precision. The dragon's mighty form, imposing and terrifying just moments ago, now moved with the awkwardness of a creature constrained. The battle was no longer about power, it was about wit. Lyra's mind raced faster than her heartbeat, calculating, predicting, improvising. She realized she could force Kael'thas to crash against the canyon walls if she timed her movements perfectly. With a burst of courage, she darted close to its front, jabbing the spear at the shoulder joint, then rolling behind cover just as the dragon lunged to counterattack. Sparks flew with every clash, and Kael'thar's roar filled the night sky, echoing off the mountains. One final maneuver came to her mind. If she could force Kael'thar into the narrowest part of the canyon, she could restrict its movement completely, pinning it long enough for a decisive strike. She led the dragon step by step, her movements precise, her nerves steel. Kael'thar, enraged and exhausted, followed blindly, its instinct to attack overriding its intelligence. Finally, at the canyon's tightest point, the dragon flailed, wings scraping stone, claws gouging the earth. It was trapped, immense, powerful, but confined. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and adrenaline. She gritted her teeth, spear at the ready. One strike, precise, powerful, unrelenting, could finish this. The dragon's golden eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, intelligence and courage faced off directly. Lyra tightened her grip. Her mind was sharp, her resolve unbroken. This was the moment where wit, courage, and humanity's indomitable spirit collided with sheer force. Kael'thar was mighty, ancient, terrifying, but Lyra had learned its patterns, understood its mind, and used her own to turn the battlefield in her favor. The final clash was imminent, and the canyon became the stage for a test of human ingenuity against dragon might. The outcome would decide more than victory or defeat. It would prove that courage, intelligence, and resolve could stand against even the most overwhelming force. The canyon walls pressed close, jagged and unyielding, cutting the sky into a narrow strip of darkness above. Kael'thar thrashed violently, wings scraping stone, claws gouging the earth. Every movement sent tremors through the ground, every roar shook Lyra to her core, yet she stood firm. She had forced the dragon into this trap, guided it step by step, anticipated every strike, and now the battlefield was hers to command. Her hands burned from gripping the meteorite spear so tightly. Blisters had formed, blood had begun to mix with ash, and her muscles screamed with exhaustion. But she could not falter. This was the moment her courage, her cunning, and every lesson passed down from her father would be tested. Kael'thar was immense, terrifying, and furious, but Lyra's mind was sharp. Her plan, the trap, the strikes, the timing, had brought the dragon here. Now it was time for the decisive strike. Kael'thar roared, a sound so powerful it rattled the stones around her, sending loose rocks tumbling down the canyon floor. The dragon lunged forward, trying to regain balance, but the walls confined it. Its wings could barely move, its tail lashed blindly, striking stone rather than her. Lyra's heart pounded, but she felt a strange calm settle over her. Fear had not disappeared, but courage was louder. She circled, keeping just out of reach of the claws and tail, her eyes locked on the opening she had been waiting for, the base of Kael'thar's left wing. The scales here were slightly thinner, worn by age and battle. It was her only chance. She took a deep breath, centering herself, feeling the weight of the spear as both weapon and promise. This strike had to be perfect. Kael'thar twisted, jaws snapping, but Lyra anticipated the movement. She ducked under its head, rolled forward, and drove the spear deep into the joint. Sparks flew as metal met scale, and Kael'thar bellowed in pain, a sound that shook the canyon walls. The dragon's thrashing slowed slightly, and for the first time, Lyra saw a flicker of vulnerability in its golden eyes. She didn't hesitate. She withdrew the spear only slightly, repositioned, and thrust again with all her strength. The meteorite tip pierced deeper, the dragon's roar turning into a tortured scream that echoed through the mountains. Its wings faltered entirely, the mighty force that had once thrown fire across the village now reduced to uncontrolled flails. Lyra pressed her advantage. Every strike, every calculated movement, was executed with precision. Kael'thar lashed, tried to bite, swung its tail, but each attack only reinforced its confinement within the canyon. Lyra's mind raced, combining strength and strategy. She knew the dragon would eventually recover from a single strike, but repeated, precise hits, focused on the weak points, would break its power. She leaped onto a protruding rock, using it to gain height, and drove the spear again into the dragon's shoulder, forcing it further against the canyon wall. Kael'thar roared in fury, flames curling from its mouth, but now it could barely aim them. Lyra ducked and rolled as a burst of fire swept past, scorching the rocks at her feet. She could feel the heat, smell the burnt stone and scale, but her resolve didn't waver. With one final surge of adrenaline, she climbed higher, balancing on a jagged outcrop. Kael'thar's head snapped toward her, but its movement was slower now, more predictable. Timing her leap perfectly, she drove the spear deep into the base of its neck, the point sliding between the scales with a metallic screech. Kael'thar's roar turned into a shuddering, guttural cry as it staggered. Its wings collapsed entirely, pinned against the canyon walls, and the thrashing slowed. The ground shook with each of Kael'thar's final movements, but Lyra remained steady. Every fiber of her being was strained, every muscle screaming, yet she stood, spear in hand, unwavering. She felt the weight of the village's hopes, the legacy of her father, and the courage of every human who had ever faced impossible odds. She realized then that courage was not the absence of fear, it was standing tall when every instinct screamed to flee. Kael'thar let out one final roar, a shuddering note of fury and pain, and collapsed onto the canyon floor. Smoke rose from its nostrils, and the golden eyes that had glimmered with intelligence dimmed. Lyra exhaled slowly, dropping to her knees, her body trembling from exhaustion, relief, and the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had done it. She had faced a creature of myth and survived. She had struck with skill, wit, and courage, and won. The villagers, who had been watching from a safe distance, emerged cautiously, eyes wide with awe. They whispered prayers, some weeping, some laughing in disbelief. Lyra lowered the spear, the tip still glinting in the firelight, and allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. She had not just survived, she had proven that humanity's heart could stand against even the fiercest flames. She stepped closer to Kael'thar, studying the fallen dragon. Even in defeat, it was magnificent, terrifying, and alive with the memory of power. Lyra's hands shook, not from fear, but from the realization of what she had accomplished. Courage, intelligence, and resilience, these were the weapons that no dragon could ever destroy. As the first light of dawn crept into the canyon, burning away the smoke and shadows, Lyra stood over the dragon, the spear still firmly in her grip. The village behind her began to rebuild, hearts emboldened by her example. She knew the world was larger, more dangerous, and more beautiful than she had ever imagined. And she knew this, courage, when forged like steel, could stand against flames, scales, and even legends themselves. Lyra exhaled, letting the weight of the night fall away, and looked up at the sky. The battle was over, but the story of the human who faced a dragon would endure, whispered through generations, a testament to the strength of the heart that stands.